Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 32 with Tino and Aaron. We'll have a special guest join us for a discussion on trading that we recorded a couple days ago. What's going on, Aaron?
Not too much. Getting ready for the grind of the work week here.
That's right.
Tuesdays are always kind of ramp up day. Look forward to always having this discussion.
Right on. Today we're going to cover a quick TGFBI update, a little Fantrax, talk a little, as I said previously, talk some trade philosophy. We'll each do a hitter deep dive. We'll talk a little bit about the upcoming games of the week. And then if we have time, open forum and cards. Any coffee stories for us?
Yeah, I had the single origin brew that I'd shared recently that I'd purchased that bag. It's Lancaster County Coffee Company. It's one of the older roasters here. There's 3 or 4 local roasters, and this is one of the older ones. I hadn't had a chance to have their coffee. I enjoy Peruvian coffee quite a bit. This coffee was on the lighter side of my preference, so the astringency and some of the brighter notes that I don't find as pleasing were definitely present, but I did enjoy. I had a nice sweetness, and I would definitely try one of their coffees, maybe more on the medium roast spectrum, but I couldn't pass up to try a Peru and to try I like to try different roasters when I find stuff that looks interesting. So it was decent, not in my sweet spot, but a good cup of coffee for sure.
Where was it on the roast spectrum?
I would say it's like a little short of city.
It's pretty light.
Yeah, it was pretty light.
It's interesting because that's where my I guess roast palette lies, is right in there. Probably 10 years ago when I owned my own shops, it was almost lighter than that. I think part of it was that was like what the cool kids did, and I was trying to be a cool kid. As I get older, I think I have a little less tolerance for it, but it's interesting. I think as we, at least for me, and it sounds like for you, as we drink coffee for longer and good coffee for longer, our sweet spot from a roast standpoint starts to shrink. I know mine has, where I'm very specific at this point in time as far as what I really look for as far as roast goes.
Yeah.
So my coffee story is that just quickly, I used to really seek out African coffee. Love Kenyan coffee specifically. I still do, but I've found that as my palate has, I wouldn't say developed, but just kind of progressed along the way, my love for African coffee is really waning, and I tend to avoid Ethiopian coffee at this point in time. And I don't know, I never really drank Rwandan coffee, in large part because of the threat of potato bugs, and I just have such an immediate reaction to any sort of potato bug flavor in coffee, which isn't supposed to be there. But I just last week I was just thinking, as I was looking to buy coffee at the Walla Walla Roastery, I was thinking to myself, I would have immediately gravitated to any African coffee 10, 15 years ago as what I favored and what I loved. And I was a little bit sad that love for African coffee is no longer there. I remember there was, I don't remember where it was, but I found some naturally processed Kenyan coffee. This was years ago, and I was so excited. I thought it was going to be like my God shot, or like the greatest coffee I've ever had, because I, at the time, really valued naturally processed coffee, and Kenya was my favorite. And now I don't know that I would have the same reaction. So there was just a little sadness for me in that I don't have the same enthusiasm for African coffee as I once did. That said, I have really come to appreciate Central American coffee in a much different sort of way than I used to. So it's probably just my palate changing as far as what I enjoy. And I think as my roast profile is moving slightly darker, that is helping me to enjoy Central American coffee a little bit more. Anyways, it was just a thought that I had when I was at the coffee shop, and I thought I would share.
Have you ever heard the sort of theory as to why Kenyans have such a unique acidity?
I have not.
So I had read recently that they have more phosphorus in their soil.
Oh, huh.
And so there's an idea that that phosphoric acid is more prevalent. And that's one of the organic acids that's present in coffee.
Sure.
All of them have them, but there's this thought maybe that's what gives Kenya that brightness that is very very distinguishable. Most Kenyans are washed. I haven't seen a lot of Kenyan naturals. I can certainly understand the excitement from your story, but yeah, Kenya is probably my favorite African region. I don't drink a ton because it's not Laura's favorite, and I'm lucky enough to be able to share my coffee with her. So I cede to her preferences because we share coffee. But I love washed Kenyans.
It's I think I always associate grapefruit and like red berry with Kenya when I think those are my immediate thoughts from a flavor standpoint. And again, there was this juiciness to it, especially, in the coffee shop days for me, we would pull single origin espresso and always rotate through whatever we found was interesting and try to create the most fruit forward, sweet kind of ristretto bomb that we possibly could. And there were naturally processed Bali and Kenya were the two that were always kind of the most favorite with regards to that. It was like trying to create a Jolly Rancher out of coffee, essentially, but lots of fun. All right, TGFBI. We are currently in 6th place overall out of 465. We're kind of we've leveled out right around 128 points, which is good for a 13-point lead in our 15-team league. 2nd place in hitting, 2nd place in pitching. We still remain there as well. Any thoughts on this team other than we continue to perform, and it's been really exciting and invigorating up to this point?
I think the most newsworthy thing that other people who play fantasy and follow baseball might find some interest in is, we roster Manny Machado, and he and Lindor on the infield have really been stalwarts, for us, on the dirt. And just what's going on with him. I think I had an unfounded concern of what his injury was going to look like and what that would look like for our team. He is yet to go on the IL. He also hasn't played yet. And we were able to get by last week. It really didn't lose any ground, as you detailed. But I think what that pointed out to me was, again, just the irrationality of that concern of losing him. Not that I want to lose him, but just we have a really deep lineup, and we seem to have just get contributions from multiple places each week. So I think sometimes I underestimate just the depth of our lineup. Like even catcher, where that's an area we knew we were gonna coming out of the draft was an area of focus. We've been able to find production there just to continue to mine for talent, trying to be ahead of the curve on Marino and things like that. So I think we have a really good deep lineup, and have been able to withstand the ups and downs of like Vaughn's health, waiting on an O'Neal Cruz. We've had those headline guys and Julio and Lindor who have really been consistent. But I just think we have a really deep lineup, and this Machado, navigating this Machado uncertainty has been a reminder of that for me.
Right. It's difficult when, I think that's what distinguishes good teams from great teams is you can have a good team that's performing well. But if you're not deep enough and you're not a great team, if you lose one of your star players, especially at a premium position, quite often it can sink you. And I think we see that in all fantasy leagues, right? Where, I know that on Rates and Barrels, they had a discussion about their last episode, they had a discussion about losing Harper or losing a star player and how do you replace that production? And, I think especially in Roto, like this, with the team like ours, replacing Machado, it's not a position you want to be in, but with players like Acuna, like Lindor, like Julio, like Schwarber, you don't see that same sort of drop, at least immediately in the standings. Now, if he was out for 2 months, I think we would see a bit more of a drop. But one of the attractions to Machado for us was that he's a soldier, right? He plays 145, 150 games a year. And I think his mentality is showing up in the fact that he hasn't gone on the injured list yet, and that he wants to come back. Whereas if we didn't have that type of star power around him, I think we would be a lot more panicked. So to your point, absolutely, I think that's the case. We're still waiting on Acuna to really be healthy and play consistently, and he hasn't really kind of found his power yet this year either. So there's more potential there. But yeah, super proud of this team, and I think your point is well taken with Machado. It's easy to be reactive and scared, but I think that we're better off keeping our fab money and waiting to pounce big, even if it's to keep a player away from other teams, than it is to try to find, a kind of a league average or replacement level third baseman and spend big money on him.
Yeah. It was and we, in terms of moves real quick, I mean, we picked up Brujan. He was our second choice. We were targeting Paredes, and we were the second place bid, but we did drop Ezekiel Duran, who was demoted to AAA, but Josh Smith coming back up just to have another infield outfield option. But I think in terms of what we got from Duran, he's someone that maybe we can plug in and get some production to get by. I also like what we're doing with our pitching, not really going after starters, but the last 2 weeks we've had it, or maybe 2 weeks ago, we had an AJ Minter, who has one of the best strikeout minus walks ratios and for all relievers. And this week we have Michael King, who similarly is just kind of a monster when it comes to strikeouts for a reliever, pitches late in leverage situations, can have a few wins. But, if we have a rash of injuries, or we have guys that, have a 2 week thing and they're playing at Dodgers, at New York Mets or something, having these relievers who we can spot in.
Right.
Why it's going to hurt our strikeout volume, can really strengthen our ratios, which is also an area where we're competing in. So I just like that we're thinking really strategically about relievers necessarily who don't get saves. I'm not necessarily going after mid-tier starters who can maybe hurt us in other ways.
Well, I was shocked to see King on the wire, because I assume it was a roster crunch for someone, but I was really surprised because he is such a quality pitcher, right? Even if he doesn't provide you with saves. The other, just looking at our pitching staff quickly, we do have like this week, we have Sewald, Joe Barlow, Bednar, and Doval in our in our starting rotation, not rotation, but pitching staff. And then I look at Tyler Anderson. I know Tyler Anderson has wavered a bit. His stuff has been up, but he's wavered a bit recently. But we really hedged well, in my opinion, and especially getting out in front with pitching. We have some stats that we can rest on a little bit. And if Anderson does waver a bit, we can take Anderson out. We have both Helsley and King to insert to continue to maintain our ratio. So if there's any wavering or injuries with our starting pitching, which we've really leaned on, as you said, we have a lot of fallback, and to me that's a really, really big deal. And I think we're thinking forward in a way that I may not have done in the past. I think it's really smart as far as I'm concerned.
I think that's looming on the horizon is the MLB trade deadline. The next month, we're going to see a lot of relievers move around. So again, we may have a couple of closers who right now we think of as closers on our team that may get moved to a spot where they don't have that role. And that's where, again, I just love the depth that we have, because I think, especially given where we are in the overall, steals and saves are really important with the overall.
Right.
And so I think still having some ceiling in those categories is important as we try to maybe push for the overall.
Right. Bednar and Barlow for sure.
Yeah.
I think we could see dealt. I know there's a lot of talk about Bednar being dealt. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but from a Fantrax league perspective, I hope not. But yeah. I know there's a lot of smoke there right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else with Fantrax?
Oh, with TGFBI, you mean?
Or excuse me, TGFBI, yes.
No, I don't know. I know the only other thing I wrote down was just Verlander, Nola, and Gilbert, just how it's not the sexiest preseason names that were up there being talked about as the aces, but I don't think you can underestimate what they've done for our team.
Not at
Just the
all.
stability. I mean, they all have had starts where they go out and give up 4 earned runs.
Right.
That's going to happen. But they also have had just as many starts where they've given up basically nothing, or had games where they've had 10 or 11 strikeouts. They're all getting wins. They're all going deep into games, and they've just been exceptionally steady. And I think, from my perspective, the way I like to build a team, having 3 or 4 starters that are like that is something that is really a key point to consistently winning. So
It's the backbone, really.
yep.
It is I think I've come around to that. You've kind of always sat there, but I'm starting to come around to the fact that no matter what happens I take the Fantrax League as an example, no matter what happens with the rest of my team, bullpen and hitting, I always have typically 4 starters that are going to perform pretty well over the course of the week. And that's kind of keeps you from getting blown out at any point in time. And I think in Roto, it just keeps us plugging along and gives us a shot at the end. The other 2 that I would point out is, I think Nola, like, as you said, Nola, Gilbert, Verlander, not the prettiest names necessarily. Verlander came with a little bit of risk. People had questions about Gilbert. Nola's always kind of underperformed his metrics. But the 2 that I'm most proud of, I think, are Cease and Anderson, because to me, that's how we've gotten ourselves in this position with TGFBI, is more the research that we did on the margins to find players that we thought had tremendous upside that others might not have valued in the same way. Cease had a little bit of helium, but not 4th round helium, which is where we took him. So yeah, I think there's some really interesting stuff going on with this team. We'll continue to evaluate this team moving forward, just because we're performing at the rate that we are currently. Fantrax. So what we thought we would do is, instead of kind of reviewing last week, we would talk a little bit about what we see from our team currently and what we want to do, if there are moves that we want to make or things that we're targeting moving forward. You want to get us started?
Sure. The things that I'm focusing on as I try to move forward into the we're past the halfway point in our regular season. Last week was our 11th week. This is the first week of 10 weeks to come here. So we've crossed the halfway point. And as I evaluate my team, I'm looking at areas of opportunity being OPS for hitting, strikeouts, and then losses and holds for the pitching side.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go? Sorry, go ahead.
In terms of how to fix that, from a strategy or management perspective, in my evaluation, I think trades are the only way I'm going to be able to address OPS. Players that have a high potential, high impact, and can move the needle are either hurt or already rostered. Mm-hmm. So really, trades are the only way, I think, to really have an impactful, or you have players maybe who you think are going to regress in a positive way. And you can bank on that, but I think we're over the halfway point. So you have to be honest, I think, at some point with your roster and who's performing in what way, and what's the realistic ceiling for improvement, right, and what are you basing those decisions on? So that's something I'm looking at. But again, I think trades in terms of acquiring new players in a league this deep that has a dynasty element, trades are the way that's got to happen. And then on the pitching side, to address those categories, I'm looking at the mix of pitchers. And when I say mix, I mean roles, innings pitched, roles, and those kinds of things. And then also just versatility, guys that have not necessarily a 9th inning closer or a starter, but those mix of roles. I think when my pitching staff was really rolling, I had guys who pitched at the end of the game, guys who pitched in the middle of the game, and a good starting rotation. I think as I look at my roster now, I'm missing that middle. Missing that middle piece. A lot of the guys who were the middle guys for me earlier in the year, I've either churned, or they became starters, or they've become closers. And so again, I think I'd like to get your thoughts on this, but I really had a negative impact from the extra innings rule. Mm-hmm. I've absorbed a lot of losses and a lot of just tough ratio hits with end of game guys, not necessarily the closer, but guys pitched the 8th inning, taking losses in extra innings. So I'm starting to evaluate, Regan. Going back to when I felt like I was really successful, it was more those middle inning guys who could really have an impact in terms of maybe multi-inning strikeouts, holds, or wins, and less of those guys who are just, they come in the eighth before the closer and you get a hold. Because I think the percentage chance of what are all those things going to line up to get that hold, whereas, and again, I'm not performing well on holds, so that's kind of the versatility and the mix that I'm trying to refresh, think about, looking at when I was more successful early on.
Right. Well, I think there are some teams that will literally sort free agents by holds and then pick the highest guy on the list. Ratios be damned, right? And then there are teams that are looking for ratios and leverage and kind of assuming that holds will come with those players. I also think that because holds is a category, just the ability or the winning percentage of the team that they're on in the major leagues is so important, right? And so, I have a pitcher like David Robertson, who I love, who I think is a very high quality pitcher this year for the Cubs, but the Cubs just aren't going to win that many games. And so he's one of my two closers, but it worries me that I'm not going to get saves from him because the Cubs are just not very good. Are there any specific positions or players that you want to call out, or are you comfortable with putting out that evaluation there?
No, I can speak to it. I mean, this process is kind of underway for me, so I can speak to some of the moves and what the thoughts were there. So I traded for Brandon Lau from the Rays, second base outfielder. As you know, I love versatility. So that's, he was appealing to me, but I need someone who barrels the ball, who's a power hitter. I looked at my preseason ranks, my evaluations of him. I really had him in that second tier of guys who really bring the power element at the position. And that's an area where I did a lot of research about what a stress reaction is, and to see what is the chance of reoccurrence. Is it something that's deteriorating? My understanding is it's basically an overuse injury. It's kind of like a bone bruise, that it's not soft tissue, it's not structural. So that gave me confidence that I could wait for him to get healthy and see what I can get from him. But again, second base outfielder who has power is an opportunity for me to improve in an area where I need to get better. To get him, I gave up a starter and a closer, and I felt like I was in a position to give up that leverage piece, and that was Ryan Helsley. And then from a pitching perspective, I cut two guys, Connor Brogdon, and then someone else who is primarily an eighth inning pitcher. Right now, the only eighth inning pitcher I have on my roster is Adam Simber, whose stuff plus and pitching plus lead me to hold on to him because I think he's just a good pitcher. And I think Toronto really hasn't gotten it going yet.
Right.
I can see them, winning, going on a 70%, winning clip over a 3 or 4 week period. And, he gets 10 or 12 holds in that time. Right now they're kind of up, win one, lose one. So I held him, but I added Yency Almonte from the Dodgers, and I also added Ronaldo Lopez from the White Sox. And without going into them too much in detail, basically both of those guys who are trending up, strikeouts minus walks, and also pitching plus, really loves them. And they're guys who pitch often right after the starter, or can pitch multi innings on a day where the starter is only going 3 or 4 innings. So the White Sox, I can't think of who the roster is. They have a couple starters right now who are just kind of spot starters. And then like Mitch White for the Dodgers, he only goes 4 or 5 innings. So both of those guys have pitched multi innings, and they also come in spots where their manager just needs them to get an out. Right. And I've always liked Ronaldo Lopez, and his command has been better since he's moved to the pen. So again, I'm trying to get more of those guys who pitch in the middle of the game and leverage spots, can go multiple innings, help me in different ways. So those moves are representative of that analysis that I shared.
So you're valuing, again, kind of what we said before, you're valuing the skills and the multi-inning reliever over holds in particular, at least as a predictive stat.
Yes.
Interesting. And then I guess the last question, I will answer the question as well. Are there, so as coming down the stretch, you're still in first. I've dropped to fourth. We're all kind of in a cluster. Top six make the playoffs. Top six look pretty safe as of right now, unless somebody makes a big run. Are you prepared to, and again, I'll answer this one honestly as well. Are you prepared to unload minor league players down the stretch to strengthen your team? How do you feel about that in general? What's your perspective? And if you don't, I'll answer it regardless. If you don't want to answer it, that's fine from a competitive standpoint, but I think it's a question worth asking because we do talk about minor league slots a lot and what we want to use those for.
I would say it depends on the player. There are a couple of minor leaguers who I'm pretty attached to for the long term, who I wouldn't move. And there are a couple others. So for an example, like Diego Cartea is a player I would listen on if someone is interested in him. He's someone who I'm pretty high in my catcher dynasty ranks, but he's still a catcher and he's pretty far away. So that would be an example. Whereas Yuri Perez is someone that I'm pretty attached to at this point.
Sure.
That I would have to be pretty blown away to even listen on him.
Right.
Because I think his ceiling is pretty high. But I really leaned into that last year with mixed results. Made multiple moves at the deadline. We'll see. Our league has been really quiet at the trade deadline, at trades so far this year. So we'll see what presents itself. I think it would be unwise to say I would eliminate it as an option. I just think for me, it'd be very player dependent. Sure. Unless so that like, hey, this is something I'm definitely going to do or not do.
Right. Cool. I like it.
What about you?
Well, we can start with that question and then I'll move to the other stuff. So I'll pull up my team roster real quick. So my minor leaguers are Cam Collier, Tamar Johnson, Christian Vaquero, Kyle Harrison, and Gavin Williams. Tamar Johnson is going to be a top 5 pick in this year's 2022 Major League Draft. Cam Collier is probably going to be a top 10 pick. He might be top 5. He's 17 years old, third baseman, Lou Collier's son. Tamar has been rated 80 hit tool by some folks. I would say that, and then Christian Vaquero was just a high ceiling power speed 17-year-old from Cuba via Dominican Republic. That's an outfield prospect for the Nationals. Of those 3 hitters, I don't think that Collier or Vaquero are going to have enough rise in their prospect status to be worth anything to anybody. So I don't know that they would fetch anything at this point in time. They're very speculative on my part. I think Collier is a real player. And Tamar is pretty untouchable for me. I think he's a superstar. I'm wishing him to be a superstar. The only reason why he wouldn't go 1-1 is that he's going to end up at second base as a 5'8" player. But by all accounts, he's an incredible hitter. And then Harrison and Gavin Williams, I like Harrison a lot. Harrison went 7 innings, 11 strikeouts a couple of days ago in Double-A. He's 20 years old, left-handed starter for the Giants. Gavin Williams was first-round pick, right-handed starter for the Indians in Double-A right now. I love both of them as prospects. I value Harrison a little higher. I just think he has a little bit more upside. Would I trade them down the stretch? Probably. I think that pitching, unless it's like a transcendent generational type starting pitcher, I think pitching should be traded at the deadline if somebody else values those pitchers, because you can find more pitching prospects and because they get hurt. It would hurt me to get rid of Harrison because I really believe in him. But at a chance to win a championship, I think I would get rid of him. So to answer your question, I'd have to trade Tamar Johnson for someone who I think is going to both fill a void and completely get me over the top. And I think the only position where that might really happen is, barring injury, it would be a third baseman or a closer. And if it was a closer, it'd probably have to be a closer plus something in order to get me to do that deal. There's a reason why I picked him in round 5 in our draft, right? I really believe in his talent. So enough minor leaguers. really what it comes down to is I'm not going to probably trade Vaquero or Collier because they're not worth anything. I would think about Harrison. I would certainly trade Williams. Harrison would hurt me to trade, but I would do it. And I think as of right now, Tamar's off limits. So again, currently I'm in fourth. We're all clustered, second, third, fourth. I think fifth as well. What I identified as my weakness is middle infield and third base currently, and also back end of my pitching. So I currently roster Andres Jimenez, and prior to my trade, Brandon Crawford, and I was just waiting on, and Colton Wong, but I was waiting on Tatis to get healthy. I see that I've got some decent players there, but I don't see anything great. Tatis is making me nuts. So I decided to make a deal for Jorge Polanco, who's supposed to come off the injured list next week. His numbers have not been, so I ended up trading Wilson Contreras and Ryan Tepera, plus a round 14 for Polanco and a 5. Contreras is a high price to pay, obviously, but I have MJ Melendez, and I found myself playing one of them, but not both of them at the same time. And had to make a decision as to which one I wanted to trade because I had too much of a hole, I think, in the middle infield right now to hold on to both of them. So I pulled the trigger. Polanco has not performed at the level he did last year as of yet, but his metrics said to me that he will. The one thing that I did see is his launch angle is up to 20 plus degrees. And that was the adjustment that he had made the previous year to become such a power hitter. Was he really started hitting the ball in the air a lot more. But I believe that will come back. He hits high in that order. It's a pretty good offense. The other thing I love about him is that he is, the last couple of years, he's really been an Iron Man and really believes in playing every single day. And so what I really need from that other middle infield position is just someone I can count on to play every day, even if he's not going to be great. And he is an upgrade over Colton Wong. So moving forward, I feel really solid about him and Tatis in the middle of that infield. And I felt lucky to get him. The other positions I feel pretty comfortable with. My outfield is really good. Schwarber's been just a revelation for me at first. I know he's performing at the level that people kind of thought he might, but he's just, every time I look up, he's hit a home run. Gambling on Melendez has been a little bit, moving forward, rest of the season is probably a bit of a gamble, but one I was really ready to take. My starting pitching I've talked about ad nauseum. I'm happy with my starters. I'm waiting for Scherzer to get back. And then bullpen wise, the one thing that I'm worried about is, again, Robertson not getting enough save opportunities, Bednar as well, to be honest with you. So I may look to deal for a closer down the stretch. I did make a speculative pickup with Evan Phillips. I made that pickup and I rostered him previously. I cut him, but I picked him up again immediately when I saw that Daniel Hudson was hurting out for the season. I felt with Phillips at minimum, he would slide into a higher leverage role and potentially more holds as a pitcher that I really love the skill set of. And in a dream world on a team like the Dodgers, I feel like there are issues with Kimbrel. And if he continues to blow up, who's the next in line to get saves on that team? And I don't know that any of us truly know, but Phillips is as good of an option as any. And that would be absolute fantasy gold if Phillips became the closer there, in the same way that for you, if Almonte ended up in the same place. So
sure.
So all in all, for me, again, I was happy to get Polanco. I think that I tried to buy low on him. I know that Contreras is a really good hitter, but the fact of the matter is it was repetitive in some ways. But I'm focused on strengthening my bullpen and hoping that when Tatis comes back, he is the Fernando Tatis that we all love.
Couple quick thoughts. In the vein of things move faster on here, Evan Phillips, when you picked him up, I thought you had got him before and you had traded him. And so when I saw that not only had you like he wasn't on someone else's team, but he was back on the waiver wire and you picked him up. I was like, damn it.
That's funny.
That was a really good pickup. But I look at the waiver transactions every day and our moves, and I just somehow that got past me.
Yeah.
And I was curious with the remind me what Polanco's injury was?
It was you know what?
Was it something with his eye? Or am I thinking of the Atlanta outfielder?
It was his back.
His back, okay.
Which is not great.
Okay. And then
go ahead.
My last question was just from the catcher trade. Yep. Was that you moving Contreras just because he could get more return, or was it more you wanted the younger catcher of the two because we're in a dynasty league? I'm just curious about that. Or was it just the other owner didn't value him? Or
it was both. So the other owner approached me with the initial trade and I countered and he accepted. But it was more me knowing Contreras could get more back. And I just fell in love with MJ Melendez, and I can't see dealing him. I think he has higher potential, higher upside.
Fair enough. All right.
Let's take a quick break. We'll come right back with our hitter deep dives.
Great.
Player deep dives. Aaron, who's your deep dive for the week?
So my deep dive is Dansby Swanson, outfielder for the Braves. He's a player who hasn't gotten a lot of love on this pod. When we looked at our preseason shortstop ranks, we both saw Swanson as I think we saw him pretty similarly as an accumulator, someone whose glove and just all around balances the player, keeps in the lineup every day. And yes, he accumulates a decent amount of runs, RBIs, steals and home runs just because he gets a high volume of plate appearances. But on a per plate appearance basis, based on his talent, or if there was any sort of injury, you wouldn't get much return. I really didn't see him as a difference maker. I came to Swanson because he popped on the Rolling X WOBA improvers. He was number 1 over the last 250 plate appearances, and he also was number 19 in the last 50. I think by any measure, he's been a top 5 shortstop so far this year from a fantasy standpoint. He's first in slugging, second in home runs, fourth in steals, second in runs, 41 in RBIs, and his WRC plus is 141. So while that's not a fancy category, I think I like to use that stat as a good, like, what is the player's production in relation to league average look like? So 141 is pretty exceptional. Swanson had a really slow start. He's striking out at a career high rate, albeit not much more than his career rate, but he's still striking out the most he's ever struck out, 26.5%. Early on in the year, he was batting in the 7, 8, 9 spots. But as he's improved his production, he's moved up to the number 2 spot in Atlanta's order, which is obviously a premium spot. What I found when I looked at Dansby was he is a very steady in terms of his plate approach. His walk and strikeout rates have been exceptionally steady throughout his career. However, his contact rate went down after his first 3 years and has gone down steadily and settled into like 76%. Now, for context, 82% is league average. So a pitcher swung at in the strike zone, he's 6% worse than league average. But as his contact went down, he has slowly added more power, measured by barrels and hard hit rate, to the point where this year he's in the top 15% of the league in both those categories. And quite frankly, this is something that just was off my radar. His strikeout and sub 10% walk rate, just how I viewed him, but again, as a sort of filler, I had missed that skill change with him. And you look at his XBA is slugging this year, backed up by those savant stats that we all value as predictors, skill predictors of players who are going to hit for power. And he's demonstrating that, and he's gotten progressively better at it as he's moved into the middle of his career. So I see what he's done so far. I see those percentile rates, the barrel rates and the hard hit rates that say to me that those aren't flukes. This isn't just a hot streak. They use his quality of contact and his consistent launch angle, which is something we like to look at. What is their ability to lift and drive the ball? Something that he's basically held to 16% after his first 3 years. So when he does make hard contact, he's doing it at the right angles to get extra base hits and hit for power. So He's someone I would have to begrudgingly move up, I think, into my top 10 shortstops the rest of the way, and someone I just simply didn't value that way going into the year. Still not a profile that really swoons me, but it was really eye-opening to see how he changed, and also to see the way that my bias and the way I looked at him and players of that type had sort of blinded me from looking at what's changed with him. So I value the chance to do that with him.
So I have a couple of questions. I don't know, how do we anticipate a player like Swanson running as much as he has? So his sprint speed has always been good, or pretty great, to be honest. Percentile wise, it's been, since 17 is 88th, 96th, 88th, 90th, 82nd, 84th. So nothing's really changed with his speed. But he has 11 steals this year, right? And so he's running much more, which has obviously really increased his value quite a bit. There's no way to predict that, right? In the same way that we didn't know Julio was going to do that. So there's that portion of it that I don't think is worth beating ourselves up over, other than saying,
yeah, absolutely,
he's super fast. He has the potential to, right? The other part of it that I find interesting is he does have a 390 BABIP currently. And obviously that's something that we all know is not sustainable. And so what would you do if you had Swanson currently? Because I made an offer for him that I felt like was a pretty good offer, given what he's done this year and taking into account who he's been in the past. I kind of split it down the middle. So to be honest, I offered a round one in our league, which is going to be a high round one, which are the only picks that I think are really worth that much, for Swanson, in a 15, which is the lowest round pick. And it was pretty quickly rejected with a comment of, he's a top whatever shortstop currently, and which makes sense, right? But you can't take that player at their current value, especially with the 390 BABIP and a history of not performing at that level and a history of not running as much. So I was trying to split it down the middle to try to acquire him. What are your thoughts on the speed? What are your thoughts on the BABIP? Is he a player that you would be looking to acquire currently, and how would you value him?
Taking those in reverse order, I think if I had a need at shortstop, I would be interested in him, but I think, to your point, it would be hard to acquire him right now because his value has never been higher.
Right.
And so chances are, unless he's a player that, for instance, in our drafting hole, we took Xander Bogaerts and
Carlos
Correa, and we hit on Jeremy Pena, right? So in a position and that's the league where we have a middle infield spot. So if someone had done something like that, where they had a redundancy at shortstop, and so maybe they were more easily going to let him go, I don't know if it's a situation where someone's been relying on him. It's a bad time to try to acquire him because of the way he's producing. If I owned him, knowing he's running a 390 BABIP, again, if he was someone that I felt like I could replace his power production relatively well, or maybe speed or power, and get better elsewhere, I think I would consider doing it because his value is so high right now, and he is in his late 20s. So we're probably seeing his peak years here. And, he had 27 home runs last year, so we're probably seeing his peak right now. So I would be interested in looking at offers for him if I felt like I could replace either the power or speed that he's bringing.
Right. Not to disparage him at all, but I also see an 11th percentile whiff rate and a 20th percentile
absolutely.
K rate.
That's part of his profile.
So for me, and those are for me probably red flags that carry more weight than they should, but those are always scary for me, right? And so I think if I had him and I was in contention and I didn't have a logical replacement behind him, I think I would hold and ride him out this year and hope that this entire year is going to continue the way it is. I think, and then if I was not in contention and I owned Swanson, I would be looking for the biggest package I could get in return, because I think he could get you a good, like, as I said, I offered a first round pick. I would be looking for a deal like that to solidify my team and capitalize on a peak value with Dansby Swanson.
Yeah, I think it's, the BABIP we know isn't sustainable, but what we're seeing is he is hitting the ball hard. And as you said, he has good speed. So while he always has hit for more of a middling average because it's the swing and miss, which you also pointed out, which has been, that's part of his game. He is going to swing and miss. He has always done that. That's going to bring some volatility, but I think the quality of contact he's making and his speed will help buoy some of his average and his hits, because you guys who hit on the infield that can beat out a hit now, that helps their production.
Right.
Um,
So interestingly, in our league, the team that owns him is not currently in contention, but doesn't really have. I guess you could move. He's got a couple players you could potentially move into that spot, but wouldn't produce in the same way. One other thought with Swanson is with Albies hurt and Acuna inconsistent in the lineup and Freeman gone, and I value Freeman currently or this year greater than Olsen, although I think they're similar, and I've been an Olsen proponent. I just think that offense isn't quite as good as it has been historically. And so Swanson's value would be greater to me if I believed in the Atlanta offense as I did last year. So I think there are all these factors that are not enormous factors in terms of how I'm valuing Swanson, but I think they all add up to this being his peak value, at least for me. I'd be surprised if he increased his value from this point forward.
Agreed.
Anything to add on Swanson?
No, I did a pretty extensive write-up on him from this process, which I'll post with the pod when I post it if anyone wants to read more.
Cool. I certainly do. So my deep dive was Ty France, Mariners first baseman who's currently hurt. He is second base eligible this year. His line so far this year, 316, 390, 476, 10 home runs, 32 runs, 45 RBIs, no steals. There's been a phrase that's thrown around, the Ty France effect, which is, I think, players that aren't, well, correct me if you interpret it differently. To me, it's players who aren't physically, you don't look at them and think explosive superstar. They don't necessarily have a position that they can call home. You think that they might end up at first base. If they do, the phrase is always, well, they're going to have to really hit in order to play first. We've had the same conversation about Juan Yepes. There's always players like that have a really good hit tool, but you don't know if they're going to supply the power that we typically look for from a first baseman. Right. France, watching the Mariners, France has been their best hitter. I don't know that I would call him the best player, but I would call him the best hitter. He also runs a pretty low walk rate historically, and so it's a player that has been off of my radar because of it. So he's a 6.9% walk rate this season, but a 13.8% K rate. So he's putting the ball in play and currently running a 345 BABIP. So while that's pretty high, he also hits a lot of grounders. So you'd expect it to be a little bit higher. His launch angle is 9.9 degrees. Only 6% barrel rate, which is good for 31st percentile in the league, and only a 38% hard hit rate. But he is a bit of a magician with the bat. I think he knows where to put the ball, and is able to place it in a way that I think harks back to more kind of 80s and 90s, early 90s baseball than it does current times. Some of the stats that I found really interesting. So highest swing percent of his career at 51.3%. And his zone contact rate is 93.7%. So when the ball is in the zone, he's hitting it, right? 8.8% swinging strike rate, 90th percentile K, 83rd percentile whiff, only 6th percentile speed. I wish that a hitter like this was a little bit faster, because he's putting the ball in play. He knows where he's hitting it. He gets it on the ground probably a little more often than you would like, but you could see him, if he was fast, he could be a 325, 330 type of hitter, but he's slow. So what I see from him is, I wrote that he's a spray hitter that has pull power. He hits all types of pitches, doesn't matter what you throw up there, spin, velocity. And that he's a professional hitter who doesn't have the tools, but he just produces. And he's not physical, both in the way he plays in terms of his exit velocities and things, but also in the way he looks, right? He's a professional baseball player, so he's obviously in shape, but he's not an Adonis, and he plays first and he's kind of plodding. If I owned him in fantasy, or rostered him, excuse me, I would really love to have him at second. I think that kind of production at second base would be incredible if I didn't have a first baseman. But starting next year, when he's only first base eligible, he's still, to me, a top 10 first baseman. And because, even though I'm a Mariners fan, I think that my own filters and biases prevented me from seeing him as a top 10 first baseman coming into this season. And I wish, this is one of the learnings for me, is to try to remove some of those filters and look at players a bit more objectively, because he's been an incredibly productive player. And in an era where average and hits are hard to come by, I think he would have been a great player for me to have. So while he has less than half of the home runs that Kyle Schwarber does, if France was my first baseman, given the fact that I'm third lowest in our league in hits, Ty France would have been a huge boost for me if that filter for me wasn't exclusively OPS and steals. So
Right.
great learning for me in diving into him. The other thing I'd add about France is this type of production and these types of numbers. This is not an anomaly for him. This is who he's been as a hitter for quite a while. And I think we're just coming around to recognizing the type of hitter he is. I don't think he's a 316 hitter for the rest of his career, but 290 to 300 is very attainable for him. And I think expecting somewhere around between 15 and 25 home runs per year, at least within his peak, I think is also something that you can expect. So Ty France, I apologize, especially as a Mariner, someone who I should be able to, I think, identify quickly. My bias has gotten in the way of me recognizing the type of hitter that you actually are.
His spray chart is quite lovely.
It is. That was one of the things that I really I found fascinating was, he's able to, I think that's the only way really you support an average like that, is being able to hit the ball where the fielders aren't and where the pitch is located. But yeah, that zone contact rate and the swinging strike rate, he's a good hitter. He's good hitter.
Yeah. And it's interesting, in my open forum, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the toggle between contact rate and hard hit rate, what is the relationship? And I think there is one in between someone who makes a lot of contact and the sort of velocity output or quality of contact in relation to a barrel with someone who makes a lot of contact.
So the calculation of that hard hit number, though, it's the percentage of balls that you hit in play that are considered hard hit. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
velocity.
It stands to reason, though, that if you're a hitter like France, even if your hard hit percentile rank and your barrel percentile rank are low, that doesn't mean that the number of occurrences aren't equal to a player of a higher percentile, correct?
It's true, right? Yeah.
So if you're putting take like a Joey Gallo versus Ty France. According to what we think, how they calculate the stat, they could each have the same number of barrels or hard hit balls over the same number of plate appearances, but Ty France could be his percentile rank could be much, much lower than Gallo. And so he'd show up as like a blue bubble, and Gallo may show up as a red bubble because Gallo just doesn't put the ball in play enough.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm understanding the statistic correctly.
So I think you are.
It's just an interesting way to look at, because we always look at savant percentile ranks and just say, oh, red, oh, high number, right? But I think there's more than meets the eye when it comes to that. And again, France, I think, is a good example. And that's actually something that I'm going to start looking. I never thought about it that way. It's something I'm going to start looking for, thinking differently about.
Sweet.
All right. So we're going to take, if you don't have anything else on France, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with our special guest, talk trade philosophy. And then after that, we're going to dig into schedule for the upcoming week and some open forum and cards.
Sweet.
So that was an interesting discussion on trade philosophy that we had. Games coming up this week. I didn't find a ton of games that were immediately exciting. Obviously, I'll watch darn near any kind of baseball, but just a couple games to highlight in the next couple of days. Today, we've got, we're recording on Tuesday. We've got Braves Phillies, which is Charlie Morton against Zach Wheeler. And while neither pitcher is considered, the new up and coming cool pitcher, I think if you like pitching, that's a really nice matchup to watch. Brewers Rays, which is Brandon Woodruff and Shane Baz. That's certainly for pitching aficionados is a fun one. And then Tigers Giants, Skubal versus Rodon. Two lefties. Skubal has kind of plateaued a bit since his hot start. Rodon has been a little bit more inconsistent, but is still an ace. Any of those three interest you?
I think the Woodruff Baz one does, just because Woodruff's coming back and has really underperformed so far this year. Baz had two really different results his first two starts. One where he struggled, which was understandable, and one where he looked really dominant. So, yeah, two teams that really run on pitching and run prevention struggle to consistently score runs. I think that one would be one where I would want to tune in or would pique my interest for sure.
And then Wednesday, I believe it was Wednesday. Let me double check. Yep. So Wednesday night, 6:38 in Anaheim. It's Michael Kopech and the Chicago White Sox against Shohei Ohtani and the Angels. A lot of premium velocity and potential dominance from both of those pitchers. I know you'll be tuning into that one. It looks to be a fun one. And then also with Ohtani, the White Sox are such a right-handed heavy lineup, and I think that works to his favor quite a bit. And I didn't really find anything else Thursday, Friday, Saturday that really piqued my interest. Sunday, we've got A's at Mariners, Montas against Ray. I just love a nice Sunday matchup, especially in a park like T-Mobile. Anticipate that being a well-attended sunny matchup. And then Padres Dodgers, Darvish against Kershaw, which is a very classic matchup as well. The other thought I had with regards to the schedule is, I don't know if you've seen this. On Sunday, so I'm speaking West Coast time. On Sunday, we have baseball from start times, not finish time, start times, from 9:05 a.m. until 4 p.m. So it's essentially 10 hours of baseball straight. And then on Monday, we have baseball from 8:05 a.m. until 6:10 p.m. start times. So that's 13 hours of baseball. If each game is 3 hours, that's on the 4th of July. You best believe I'm going to be grilling, having a beer, and having a baseball game on the entire day on Monday, hopefully Sunday as well. But one of the best weekends of the year, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm just going through some of the matchups.
Anything else catch your eye?
For the 4th of July, I was looking at the slate of games.
There's nothing that I really got excited about on the 4th.
I just hope everyone's playing,
For sure. The one matchup that I think I would tune in for is Rodon and Gallen. I don't like watching games in Arizona. I've got something against it. But from a pitching matchup standpoint, that's a nice matchup. We've got Manoah going in Oakland, and I think there's potential for a really great Manoa start. Obviously, big park, bad offense. The boring matchup of the week is Chris Flexen against Sean Manaea. I like Manaea, and he's got the potential to be good, but I know I'm supposed to root for my home team, but Flexen, I always feel like we're going to be losing, 5-4 going into the 5th inning with him.
Mariners Padres, just kind of an oddball.
Well, it's West Coast, and they're both in the Peoria complex, so I think they're trying to create that sort of interleague matchup between those two. But yeah, interesting. There are not a ton of, incredible matchups team to team. You've got Tampa at Boston, but baseball's baseball. I'd watch a baseball game down the street of, local high school sort of thing if that's the baseball that I could consume. Anything else to add with the schedule?
I don't think so.
Cool. Let's move to open forum. What's your question?
So my question is, are advanced stats an advantage anymore? This kind of goes back to what you're talking about with Ty France. I think it comes up tangentially in that conversation. But as you mentioned, every savant has become ubiquitous. You go to the players page, you look for the red and the blue. And I think my answer to this question is in how you use the information. I think I've also, with the discussions I think we also had about France and Dansby Swanson, better understanding or having a better feel for when your bias is getting in your way of your analysis as well.
Mm-hmm.
What are those stats that are immediately turn you off on a player, and how to look beyond that about what they can do? Yeah, it's just something I just started to wonder aloud to myself is, what's the competitive advantage of looking at some of these hard hit and barrel rates and velocities and things like that. I think pitching is more nuanced. With hitting it's more, I would say narrow, but it's more straightforward maybe. But yeah, so, I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Are we speaking major league or are we speaking fantasy?
Fantasy. I was thinking fantasy when I wrote the question.
Okay, so I would say yes. I would say that they are as valuable, if not more valuable, than they've ever been. The reason I say that is a couple things that come to mind. One is I don't know what the percentage is of fantasy baseball players that use advanced stats, but I would guess that it's a lot lower than we think still. Because our community, meaning, our friends, and then the things that we read is still very narrow, right? It's a bit of an echo chamber, but I don't think that's representative of everyone else out there. So I'll put that aside as one portion of the argument. The second portion of the argument is there's the analysis, there's the stats, right, that other people put together for us, but it's the ability to put those stats together and make an argument that I don't see it very many people being able to do, even experts, right? So we can spew all the statistics we want, right? Anybody can read off a savant page. Anybody can look at the red bubbles and say, oh, that player's good. But how do you interpret those statistics, right? It's just like being in college. How do you make an argument? To me, each player is a thesis statement with a bunch of evidence in the middle, the bulk of the paper, and then a conclusion at the end about that particular player, right? And what I think most people do is just present the evidence as a blob of stuff without actually making a coherent argument about who that player is. I think we make that logical jump, you and I, pretty naturally. And so we present a bunch of evidence and naturally come to a specific conclusion about a player, but not everybody has that skill. And that's not patting ourselves on the back. I'm just commenting about what I think about fantasy baseball as a whole. So put that as like bucket number 2, which is what is your ability to actually analyze the stats that you're reading and consuming. So a good example of that would be our TGFBI team. We didn't do anything really that was different than what a lot of people were saying, but as far as looking at stats, but I think that our ability to see what those stats meant, to understand what was coming because of the stats, right? To use them as predictive statistics is a little different, at a little different, higher level. And I think that's what we're finding both in our league and TGFBI. And then the third one is, there are a lot of, in my opinion, there are a lot of stats out there that are not valued correctly. And what I mean by that is, you know, like there's debate about what CSW means. What's the weight of CSW? Is it something that we should be looking at, right? There are some experts out there who talk about CSW all the time, which is called plus swinging strikes. It's a stat I don't cite very often. I think called strikes is such a subjective thing. And so to judge a pitcher or a hitter based on something that's that subjective is, I think, a bit foolhardy, in my opinion. So there's stats that I value more so than the next fantasy player does, even if they are already into advanced metrics. So my argument is, yeah, I think they're as important as they've ever been because we have more access to them. And most importantly, because I really truly feel like what sets us apart as fantasy players from one person to the next is your ability to actually analyze those and understand what they mean. What do you think?
Okay. No, I think it's true. I mean, as you said, there is a bit of an echo chamber, and I think there's also narrative and media, play a large role in how players are viewed. Team context can hinge on value. And I think all these things kind of mix into how peers, league mates, etc., value players, whereas we're more likely to look at what is the skill of the player, and regardless of some of those other factors. But I think all those things you mentioned about the Swanson interaction you had about trying to make a trade for Swanson while he's producing at this level, whereas maybe we're looking at it in a more discerning way of like, okay, he's producing these stats, but how real is that, or what's changed, which is what prompted me to do the deep dive, is what is behind, what are the skills saying about this production.
Right. I do think that the where we've come as far as the baseline goes with regards to conversation and terminology and statistics that are cited is we've come a long ways from game-winning RBI being on the back of a baseball card, right?
Right.
Certainly using OPS as a statistic or as a category in our league, that's a big deal if you think about where we were 10 years ago. But with regards to, launch angle and swinging strike rate and hard hit rate and zone contact and all that sort of thing, I think those are stats that not a lot of even managers in our league, I think they look at. I don't know if they look at them for every single player that they have. And I do think fantasy baseball, because there's so much depth, it'll always be the type of game where the more work you put in, the more time you put in, the more you drill down, the better player you become, because it is so stats based. I think it's a great question. The stats are also always changing, so the more you can stay ahead of the curve as far as what new stats are out there and whether you can discern if those stats are actually applicable and important and relevant, can also help you have a competitive advantage. But yeah, great question. I hope they're always as important as they are now, because I love them so much. So my question is a little less involved, I think. My question is, do you miss the loogie? Loogie being the left-handed relief specialist that comes in for one batter and never faces a right-hander, because we obviously, with the implementation of every reliever having to face 3 batters or at the end of an inning, we've, in an effort to reduce the amount of time games take, we don't see the loogie anymore.
Not only do I miss that, I haven't even thought about it. So I can say unequivocally, I don't miss it. But I think there is something to when managers go to the bullpen and in what order and how that works out. I don't know, there's just, it's hard to put your finger on it, but there are just certain teams, certain managers who seem to have a better feel for that. Whereas I'm gonna say David Bell, for example, with the Reds. It just seems like he does not really sure what he wants to do. And every time there's the least bit of sign of trouble, he just changes the pitcher. That's my impression from watching Reds games, which I watch a decent amount. There doesn't seem to be a lot of conviction behind who he uses when and where.
Sure.
Whereas other teams, you can see there's a real purpose behind when they use which pitchers and what spots against whom. And I think it's on the edges, it's nuanced, but I think there's really something to that. But no, I don't miss necessarily the left-handed specialists.
Do you have, what's your opinion about bullpen role and how to build one if you were a major league manager or GM?
I guess I'm kind of shifting, away from just having as much stuff as possible. I would want guys who can go 3 or 4 innings. Certainly guys who are, I know that he's had his moments, he's home run prone, but every time I watch Razo Iglesias pitch, I think that's what a closer looks like.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, just his stuff and just the movement he gets on his pitches. Like, you want someone like that who just, when there's one out and there's someone on third, you can have someone you can go to who can get 2 strikeouts. You know what I mean?
He has a third, like a legit third pitch, correct?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, I think he has 4 or 5, honestly. So he's a little bit atypical in that reason. But I think you want a couple guys like that as well. There's a place for that. But I think I'm drifting away. When I had my last franchise I built in OTP, I just tried to get as much velocity and as much stuff in the back end as I could. And it was really following that race pattern of, once the game got to the 6th, I had a very linear path to close the game out. And as I'm thinking about how I want to construct my next franchise, I'm thinking about it differently. So
Iglesias, just as an aside, 2022 4-seamer 32%, slider 20 or 30%, changeup 19%, sinker 19%. I bring that up because I think most closers have 2 pitches. And so to have 4 that are effective and to be able to use a sinker to get ground ball when you're coming in a tough situation with runners on versus looking for a strikeout, I like that a lot. It's funny, I feel like I'm not really a contrarian type of dude, but what I found is when we had, with the advent of the La Russa bullpen with Gene Nelson and Rick Honeycutt as the setup guys, right lefty setup guys, and then Eckersley as the closer, that was kind of the advent of these really strict defined roles. And then I think of, the Yankees with John Wetland in the 8th, or John Wetland in the 9th, and was it Wetland in the 9th and Mariano Rivera in the 8th? Or was it flip-flopped? I don't remember exactly. And then the Angels with Francisco Rodriguez and Troy Percival. And I think about these really defined roles. And I was always of the argument, like the old school fireman, right? Let's get the dude in there for an inning and 2/3 to get, 5 strikeouts. And who cares when they come in? Just let's get them in a good leverage situation or high leverage situation. Always made that argument. I really believe, numerically, that's what made sense. And this was probably 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. I remember Theo Epstein was building a bullpen that way. And people are like, well, what are you doing? You don't have a closer. And he's like, well, this is how we're doing it. And now that we see bullpens like the Mariners that are built in that way, right, where they're playing leverage and matchups and there aren't strict defined roles. You don't know who the 8th inning guy is. Sometimes it's in the closing role. Sometimes it's Seawald. Sometimes it's Castillo. Sometimes it might be Giles now. I really do think there's value in giving, whether it's an employee or a player, a very defined role. This is what you do, right? We put you here because you are best at this. You are the best pitcher at the end of a game that we have. Your building up that confidence, right? Saying your mentality is this. And imagine you're playing against the Cubs in the late 80s. And Lee Smith is literally sleeping in the clubhouse like a big bear in the clubhouse until, the 7th inning, because he knows that that's his role. And that Lee Smith is going to come into the game. He doesn't care who he's facing. He's throwing 100 miles an hour. He's got an incredible slider. And you're done, right? You're toast. I think there's something to that. I really think there's something to having that dominant closer at the end of a game that scares the shit out of the other team, because they know they're done. If they don't score by the 9th inning, they're done. And in the 7th and 8th, having really dominant, for me, it's having a right-hander and a left-hander that are capable of striking people out, that you can mix and match. But then also the rest of the bullpen, say the other, 4 guys, it's variety, right? You want someone that can get ground balls. You want someone that can strike people out. You want left and right. You want someone that might be able to go a couple innings. But I do believe at the end of the game, like matchup, regardless of matchup, you got to put, there's value in the psychology of having a really dominant guy at the end of the game and making the other team fear that. And in telling your team, this is our guy, we know we're winning if we get to him. I don't think we value that. There's no way to quantify it, right? And so if we can't quantify it in baseball, it's not worth anything. And then
I love that you shared that, because I think because it's so novel, and I'm a curious person, like what the Rays did in the last 5 or 6 years with Abbott the opener, and also the way they used their bullpen. It was kind of novel at the time. I am realizing more and more, I think this year, like what you're saying about Lee Smith, or having that closer, that sometimes I think it's easy being fantasy players, we value saves, so we want guys to have defined roles. But from a selfish fantasy perspective, but in a real world perspective, having someone who can get those last 3 outs it is a huge deal. Mm-hmm. Look at like the Twins, a team that you and I both have a fondness for. How many times they are not able to get the last 3 outs, and how difficult that is on that team.
100%. I think go ahead.
I get like all the data saying like if the 2, 3, 4 hitters are up in the 8th, I get all that. I really do. And intellectually I can understand it. But when you burn that guy and then you go to the 9th and you're bringing someone who doesn't have that hammer, those last 3 outs are often quite tough to get.
Right. I've got so two more thoughts. The first one is, I grew up with the Mariners. The Mariners notoriously had the most horrible bullpens of all time. And I remember trading Derek Lowe and Jason Varitek for Heathcliff Slocum at the deadline, because we were looking for a closer, because the bullpen was so bad. The rest of the team was not bad at all. So the ability to really demoralize a team without a closer, without a real good closer, I think is a real thing. But I will also say that finding a closer, finding dominant bullpen arms is not something that I would invest a large percentage of the team's payroll budget on, because I think the ability to create a high leverage reliever is not as difficult as one might think, right? So you see a lot of teams cycle through a ton of like the Rays do. They pick up players that have had Tommy John, or they have to sit on for a year to try to build their arms back up, and then they run them out there until their arms blow up again, which I don't like that in reality. Seeing, because they're fungible, right? They're expendable assets as opposed to players with real arms. But the idea that you can go out and find dominant relievers on the scrap heap, or turn a middling starter into a dominant reliever if you can figure out how to get that velocity bump. If I'm running a team, I'm not spending a ton of money on my relief, right? Or once that closer hits free agency, I'm letting him go. And it doesn't matter if I'm the Yankees. I'm still letting him go because I believe in my ability to find Paul Sewald, who was a New York Mets reject, and turn his slider into an incredible, high stuff plus pitch. Just like everyone talks about Paul Sewald being high on the stuff plus, Eno stuff plus rating, and they don't know why. Just watch him, watch him pitch and you'll see why. But that was built from nothing, right? The Mariners have done that. They did that with Steckenrider, who is since been cut, but they got a lot of value from Steckenrider. They've done that historically with relievers. So I don't know. To answer my original question, I do miss the loogie. I miss anything that's strategy is fun for me. So I miss the ability to bring that reliever in. The other thing is, if you're sitting down and watch a baseball game, to me, there's no real difference between 2.5 hours and 3 hours and 15 minutes. You're investing a portion of your day to do it. So while it might not be great for the casual fan, for me, I'm all for it. I don't mind it at all. So yeah, that was my
that's great.
Open forum question. I don't have any cards. Do you have any cards to open here?
I do.
Awesome.
Let me get my camera. Stop blurring. Right. I really do know how to use this computer. There we go. I'm in my laundry room today.
Nice.
I don't know if you have this issue, but I totally don't have anywhere in my house that's my own that I can go that's quiet. So I just have to find a spot. So today I'm in the laundry room with the window open and the door open. It's nice
Beautiful.
And airy.
Nice.
That's my dip machine is hanging on the wall behind me. All right, here we go. So this is another my unending box, hopefully unending 2022 opening day tops. Emmanuel Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
What position is he?
Third base.
Third base. Okay. It's a new one for me. Oh, hell yes. Kyle Schwarber.
Nice. All right, man. He's been so huge for me. He's been so huge. He's just a fun one to watch too.
Another one in the Emmanuel Rivera category, Zach Short.
Oh, yeah. You mean scrub that shouldn't have a card?
Exactly. So this one says Bomb Squad. Classic there, David Ortiz.
Nice.
Cool horizontal card and a player I've never really gotten into. Charlie Blackmon.
Yeah.
These horizontal cards are pretty cool looking though.
Mm-hmm.
This is the player I was just thinking about. This is so funny. Cody Bellinger.
Man, what's happened to him?
And last but not least, a player I'd like probably more than I realized, Rhys Hoskins.
Mm-hmm. Productive player.
Nice. Yeah.
One of the greatest uniforms.
That uniform is tight.
It is.
Yeah. A couple of really good cards in there.
Cool, man.
Yeah. I just had Bellinger's triple slash this year. Are you ready for this? 211, 271, 386.
Oh, man. He's become a player that's only in the lineup for his defense and center. Who would have thought? It's sad. It's sad to me. It's all in his head. It has to be all in his head.
Yeah. He's 35th percentile on max exit velocity.
Wow.
So it makes it hard to even dream on the power.
Former NL MVP. Wow.
All right, friend.
All right, man. This weekend, if we have time.
Yep. Saturday.
Cool.
Look forward to it.
All right.
Talk. Bye.